Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about a relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. So before we begin this week's podcast, I wanted to let you know that I am launching my 8-week program, Reclaiming Body Trust, which is a group program that is starting on Wednesday, the 30th of April, running for 8 Wednesday evenings, 7:30 to 9 p.m. Irish time, which will be online via Zoom. And this program is for you, which I'm thinking it might be if you like to listen to this podcast or following this newsletter on Substack. If you're somebody who has dieted for years and years and years and feeling really stuck, but don't really know where to go next, like where do we go if we don't diet? Or maybe you're somebody who's sort of been thinking about intuitive eating, maybe you've kind of dipped your toe into it, but struggling to get going on your own, or feeling kind of like you're getting stuck in certain places, or would love to, I suppose, do this journey with like-minded people. And this journey, by that I mean finding peace with food eating and your body. And body trust is really the missing link when we're moving away from dieting and obsession with food and weight towards freedom and body liberation. And the relationship with our bodies can be really complicated, and there's so many things that can disrupt it, and often from an early age. But that doesn't mean that we can't reclaim it, that we can't reclaim feeling good in our bodies and as a place of home. And this course, or this program, is, I suppose, part book club, part reflective, part coaching. And we're going to use the book Reclaiming Body Trust, A Path to Healing and Liberation, which came out in the end of 2022 by Hilary Knive and Dana Sturdivant. And I've picked this book because I think it's really, really rich, but also it can be a quite challenging read. And what I found when I launched this as a kind of a group program using the book as the framework back in 2023 was that it was a really wonderful way of, I suppose, having a container, but also a way of using a book and taking us away from screens for a bit, coming back to kind of more old school, reading paper versions, using pen and paper to record and journal on reflection questions, and then coming together online on Zoom, where we can utilizing technology to come together from wherever you are in the world, really. So over the 8 weeks program, I will facilitate you and the other group members through myriads of topics as it is working through the book together. So we'll be looking at things like your body story, moving away from diet culture, looking at nutrition and eating as through the lens of nourishment, and moving away from sort of nutrition through the lens of dieting. Then we're going to touch on grief, and what does grief got to do with all of this? Creating space and allowing for pleasure and satisfaction, reclaiming movement, and then deepening your body trust roots and widening the healing. So we'll be going through all of this together. So each week we'll be coming together, and then you'll be reading a chapter ahead of the next week, and I'll be giving you some guidance and questions to journal on, reflect on, and then we'll come back together as a group to talk about the things that has come up for us. And one of the things that I find when we're in a group experience is this shared experience, this experience of not feeling alone, and this way of learning from each other. And there's something different, I think, when we're coming together in a small group instead of, working one-to-one. And my hope is that this program will help you understand why your body trust got disrupted in the first place, and how you can reclaim it so that you can find your way to a path free from this rigid thinking about health, weight, bodies, and nourishment. And it will allow for a deep dive into how the culture that we all swim in has had a major impact on how we feel about our bodies, and help us move from seeing our bodies as an object instead of the home that they truly are. So if you're ready to try something different, instead of just trying harder, I would invite you to come and join me along with some others for this adventure. And I'm really hoping that after the 8 weeks, you will leave feeling more connected and at home in your body. And at the end of it, that your mind, time, and energy is freed up to explore all your heart's longing instead of being hijacked by, food and weight obsessions, which we know can take up a lot of our time, energy, and even our resources. So I want to keep this group small, and I'm going to limit the group size to 6 only. But I do need 3 people for it to go ahead. So if you have 2 friends that you're thinking, oh yeah, actually they would be really up for this, do sign up straight away and we can get going. So like I said, we started 30th of April. The investment for the full program is €250 or $270 for the full program. And I'm going to put all of the details to all of this, what I've just shared with you, as a link in the show notes. So you can go and click that. And if you're ready to sign up, or just email me if you have more questions. And finally, you will also have to buy yourself a copy of the book, either a hardback copy or a soft cover version. But they're very affordable. And even if you decide not to do this program with me in a group setting, I would still highly recommend the book because it's really amazing. So I think that's all. And I hope I get to see you there on a Zoom call really soon. But now let's get on with today's podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. And today I'm going to have a conversation with Pam Goodman, all the way from South Africa. And Pam is an eating disorder and addiction therapist who has been working in this field for the past 30 years. And it was her passion for this work that was inspired by her own journey in recovery from bulimia. And she says she's been in recovery for all of her career, and eventually she found the freedom and self-acceptance that she always needed. I'm so happy that you're here, Pam. And this conversation today is really about you and your own journey versus coming to this with your professional hat on, right?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me, Lynn. I am a bit anxious, but also very excited to share. And I am glad I'm coming from the perspective of my journey through my illness and my life, actually, my whole life's journey. We all know what addiction and eating disorder therapists do. So I'm not really here to punt that at all.
I was thinking about this also because, some of that is changing, but the conversation around self-disclosure and non-self-disclosure, and I've just finished a training recently in peer support where, that's really leading with the lived experience. And like you said, like a lot of people, most people, not all, but most people who work in some kind of healthcare setting come from their own lived experience background, whether that is mental health challenges, physical health challenges, or any sort of in between. And that's usually what gets you interested in this, in working in this space, whether that is in any sort of healing capacity. And before we kind of dive into your story, I'm curious, like, what's your kind of thoughts, or how has that involved in your professional capacity, like in this, conversation around self-disclosure?
Okay, that's interesting because I've recently taken up a new position, and I was in private practice, and I got headhunted to run a facility for eating disorders, one that's just recently opened. And one of the questions they asked me in the interview was, do I self-disclose, and how do I feel about that? And I do. I do self-disclose. I'm not saying that it is needed for a client, but I do find that it's one way of a client feeling at ease, and connecting. It does help. I don't go into my past with them, but I will make reference every now and again to, whatever it was. And I just mentioned that in the interview and I got the job. So they obviously, thought it was okay. And I do believe that lived experience is a definite plus. Not to say that people who haven't lived experience can't do a better job or a brilliant job, but it's just another connection.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also like how you navigate disclosure or where you're at in your own recovery journey versus like having some distance from the illness, even if you're not considering yourself to be in full recovery. And I feel sometimes it's like, it's the lack of awareness that when people are actually not that well, but not realizing, and how some of the advice that is maybe coming from that sort of self-experience that can be more harmful versus looking at it as a way of connecting. I don't know if I'm even making sense of how I'm constructing the sentence, but like sometimes if we're dishing out advice, which is not the same as necessarily self-disclosure and creating a space of a shared experience or an understanding that I have been where you are, or I've been in similar situations.
Yeah, and I mean, people come with different perceptions of whatever, I mean, I've often heard people talk of psychologists as, oh my gosh, they need the help. People don't understand a lot. And there are some psychologists, I'm sure, who do need the help, but generally we are drawn to our professions, I feel, because of because of my journey. And so, I think anyone in the caring profession is drawn to the industry because we have strong feelings, or we have had, experiences, and I think it's all helpful. I really do.
Yeah. And so as we're starting or embarking on this conversation, I'm also curious, like what like, and again, I'm aware I'm asking you to put your professional hat back on before we sort of take it off. Okay. Is like, what do you think are the benefits of like sharing your story with people in this way? Well, or even for anybody sharing their story?
Yeah, well, people are really ignorant to what this illness is all about. A lot of mental health illness, not just an eating disorder. And there's so much shame. And so the more we hide it, the less people understand and the less people get reached. And I can proudly talk about my past now. I mean, bulimia was the one thing that I pretended was so mild. It was like, oh, every now and again, which it was more than every now and again, of course. But, I looked at everything but that because I was so ashamed. And now, people when I speak about it without shame, people are interested and people want to know. And I think it's really important for all those sufferers out there.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the more we talk about it in that sense, like it dispels some of the myths around it. And for people who don't have a lived experience of an eating disorder, actually getting to hear what it's really like for somebody who's experienced it or who are in the midst of it, so that there's more space for understanding. And then also, like what you mentioned, talking about these things so that we can remove some of the shame and stigma around it. Because it is very isolating. We're in the midst of it. It's so isolating, and it just really feels like, well, either there's something really wrong with me, or I need to get it together, or yeah, there's so much to that.
I don't know why this is coming up right this minute, but it feels important for people to understand that there's so much more to bulimia than purging, than bringing the food up. I mean, that's my journey through it was a lot more than that, all sorts of abuse, compensatory behaviors, which so many people do so easily and don't think about that there could be any kind of problem. So I always thought bulimia was you put your finger down your throat, and be very graphic right now, and that makes you a bulimic. And there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. But let's go back to the kind of beginning, and again, share as much or what you feel is relevant for people to kind of grasp that.
Yeah.
Because I come from the school of thinking that eating disorders are not just mental health disorders, they are psychosocial disorder. They have many components that feeds into how they originate, but also what can keep them going.
Absolutely.
So, like, what was the kind of perfect storm for you?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to my very beginning. And, I was born into a large family, not only my own siblings, but my cousins. And my parents moved to this very small town to help my auntie run a hotel. And both my parents worked, they needed to work, but I did have an extended family. I had a granny who was quite a cantankerous old lady, but she baked and she cooked. And so my love language was always food. And my parents were working and everybody was busy. And so food was my language, was my comfort. And I remember the first time I ever knew shame. I obviously didn't recognize that it was shame at the time, but I was about 4 years old and my mother had enrolled me in ballet school. Okay, so my mom had her own issues around being large. She was always slim, and obviously her daughter was getting a little chubby. She wanted me to be this perfect little ballerina, and she never left work, but she came home from work specially once a week to take me to ballet. And I was sitting eating chocolate. I don't know where I got it from, but I was eating chocolate. And she said to me, you can either eat chocolate or go to ballet class. And I said, I choose chocolate. And that was the first time I saw on her face the disappointment in me. And I relate that to the first time I became aware. And my mom was an amazing woman, but in earlier life, that was the message I received. And then a few years later, we moved to the big city of Cape Town, and my parents both worked, and there I did not have this extended family anymore. So I became a latchkey kid, come home, let myself in, and was just left to my own devices. So they couldn't help it. They needed to work, but their parenting also, obviously, they didn't know any better. They'd never done it. I had grandparents and stuff. So I would come home and I would eat, and then my parents would come home and have dinner, and were busy. Didn't, we weren't told to do our homework. We weren't packed lunches for school the next day. I would do my own from very young. I remember baking cakes from the passion from my granny, for a school fete or whatever it was, so we were obviously not intentionally neglected, but I was a neglected child, and food was, as I said, my comfort. So I ate and I ate and I ate. And I've sent you a picture of myself, which I would never have shown anybody 20 years ago. You know, I have very few pictures of being a chubby little girl. I was not huge at all, but I was unhealthy. I didn't do any exercise. And you could see, you know, the disgust of people in me when I go to school, and I got bullied, I got teased, I was different, but I felt different as well, just trying to fit into a new society. And I've forgotten what I was going to say. Just not being accepted and me not accepting myself, I believe is the start of my eating disorder. So it didn't start that minute. I went into, when I was about 12, I started dieting with my mom's help. She took me to a doctor. He put me on amphetamines. And yeah.
You were 12.
12
Oh my
years old. It
God.
was a pill called 10 dospan. I don't think it's around anymore. The days of Obex, I don't even know if you know about these drugs, but they were amphetamine based and completely took away my personality, because I was very quiet out of the home, but quite gregarious at home. I felt safe in my home environment, and I became a mere shell of myself. Like they just made you wired, these pills. So, but I lost weight. And then I was such a good girl. You know, everyone was so proud of me, and I was so proud of me. And that was the start of about, gosh, the rest of my teenage years, going from summer to winter, fat, thin, fat, thin. So I would, at the beginning of, just before the beginning of summer, I would really restrict, but like radically, and not go out and stare at myself in the mirror and try and feel my bones, my hip bones, because that would, you know, tell me I was getting somewhere. And miserable. And then I'd be thin for summer, but I still wasn't happy, you know, because I didn't like myself at all. And then by winter, I just couldn't anymore, like beginning of winter, and I would just go crazy and eat and eat. And that was my pattern. So I was a compulsive overeater. I didn't become bulimic until my early 20s. That was my pattern for years. And I do believe that dieting is the reason I developed an eating disorder. And then somewhere in my 20s, I went up to Johannesburg, which is another major city in South Africa, just to start something different, always looking for something, you know, looking for better. And a friend of mine who is still severely anorexic to this day and not well at all, taught me how to purge. And it was like, this is fabulous, because I didn't need to overeat and binge every minute of every day. I could, you know, I chose my moments, and I could just eat till I was spent, and I'd eat a lot. I would gorge down food. I would be deliberate. You know, I know there's often this thought that when you're in the binge, you kind of don't even know. I knew, but I was always I'd go and plan it, go and watch TV, or I don't even think there was TV at that stage. So I'd read. Yeah, we didn't have TV in South Africa until I was about.
You're showing your age now, Pam.
I know. It's okay.
Not that matters.
And I would gorge and then just bring it up. And then laxatives became involved, and never exercising. That was just not on my radar at all. But, you know, and that became my life for about 10 years. And because I didn't do it every day, because I didn't do it 20 times a day, I didn't even consider it a problem. You know, I managed my life. I went to work. I had a job. I only got into counseling and only studied in my 30s. So, all this happened in my 20s. And it became hell. Like, eventually I was taking so many laxatives that I would just faint at the drop of a hat. I would sit on the toilet for hours, and it was horrible. It was horrible. And I had no life.
So yeah, so I was just going to say that at that point it got to so there was a period where it's like, okay, this is kind of manageable and this is what I do, and it's not really it's not a big deal until it tipped over and it was really starting to take over your life.
Yeah. And but I was a nursing sister. So I was working in a psychiatric unit of a hospital, and the addiction unit, the drug addicts and alcoholics were right there, and they'd come to us for their medication. I wasn't working with them, and I became completely fascinated. My father was also an undiagnosed alcoholic, and I was starting to realize that there was more to my family dynamics than just me. I'd always thought I was the problem. I had no control. I was oversensitive, very sensitive child, and not understanding anything about trauma and anything like that. So I became very interested in the addicts and alcoholics, and decided to study. And I got into that, and I actually my bulimia waned a lot. It became less important because I had something that was really driving me. So it lay low for a while, and then I finished studying and I got a job, and I was working in this addiction unit, and I would see these, not all obviously, but some of these drug addicts and alcoholics turning to food, either turning to food for comfort. Very few anorexics at that stage, because anorexics are often not into drugs and alcohol. Some are, but so I'd see a lot of compulsive overeating, and I started relating to them. And then I had some crisis in my life. I can't even remember what it was. And I went straight into it, straight back into my old patterns. And then I knew that I actually have to do something about this. So I knew a dietitian who was an eating disorder dietitian. She was like the main one in Cape Town. And I went to see her. She made me take the laxatives out of my pocket. It was mortifying. I said, I'm not giving them to you. She said, hand them over. And I did. And I really tried. And I did. I got into therapy, and to say that was the end of me ever purging again would be a lie. To say that I didn't struggle with body image and learning to love myself and everything that goes with an eating disorder, and all the work you need to do to get better and feel more whole, took years. And there's still parts of me that, I listened to Anna Strickland, is her name, last week.
Yeah,
and
can link to that.
I felt so little when I heard some of the stuff she was saying, and it triggered me, because I still have fat bias. I still have issues around weight and body. It's so much better. And I have so much more compassion for that little girl. And I care about her, and I look after myself now. I make sure I do. And I would say that I'm well. I feel well. but my head, there's always stuff. Like there's always stuff to learn, is what I'm saying. Like people, if you aren't prepared to be challenged, I think you're quite stuck in life. And just opening myself up to listening to all these activists for change and for, embracing bigger bodies and that it's okay, was enlightening and something that I really strive to be better at today.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, that's my journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of things. I think my brain is still a little bit scrambled from the fact that a doctor, I know this is probably about over 40 years ago, could prescribe amphetamine-based drugs to a 12-year-old child at the beginning of puberty. One would have to question that, if it was an adult, still, we have weight loss drugs today that are being prescribed for under the guise of quote unquote health, but we're talking about, children and, puberty, or just at the very beginning. And you'd be wondering as well, like you mentioned there, like being on those tablets was like, really affecting your personality. But apart from that, and I think bulimia is a kind of an interesting one in the terms of when you're caught in that body image, fear, weight gain, and like how that's, or into stuck in a binge restrict cycle. It just, at that sort of tipping moment, it just feels like, in a perverted, very logical way, that this is like really the solution to all my problems, because now I can eat, I can get rid of it, and then hopefully I'm not going to gain any weight. But of course, I think bulimia in and of itself has probably, like, it can be quite hidden until it's not, but it also has a huge impact on our physical health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was so weak. I would faint at the drop of a hat. I have naturally low blood pressure, but it's normal, you know what I mean? And it's normal for me, but it would dip and I'd hurt myself, I'd fall over and bang into things. And it was more the weakness than anything else that affected my health. But my mental health became, it was very hard. I just really I despised myself. I thought I was, and not because of the bulimia, actually, that was like, oh my goodness, like it was the overeating that I hated about myself, that I had no control. But eventually, and the bulimia, as we said, was just a pleasure in a way, because it gave me the ability to comfort myself and then not put on the weight and not feel stuffed. But eventually, it was destroying my health. And just looking at, that little girl who, I also think that it's only much later in life that I wasn't diagnosed. My daughter self-diagnosed me. She said, "Mom, you've got ADHD, you've got ADD," because she's also studied. And I do. I actually started seeing it, in so many ways. And Gabor Mate says, it's a product of zoning out. Like you can't cope with and I feel that so much when I read his book Scattered Minds. I had so much compassion for the child he was talking about in there. He was speaking to me, and I sobbed reading that book, And learning to love oneself is actually a really hard thing to do, you know. But I think I have, you know, to the best of my ability. I actually really do put myself first. And I'll give you an example of what happened at work the other day. There are four of us who are the counseling team, and then the admin woman came in and she had brought a milk tart to work because for whatever reason. And at 12 o'clock, where I'm starting to want lunch by 12:30, she came to us and said, you know, we're going to have some tea, and it was a celebration of something or whatever. And I was not prepared. I did not want to eat that milk tart until I'd had my lunch. And then I'd see how I felt about it. And I did that. I went and I sat quietly on my own because I needed a bit of space. You know, we'd been on top of each other. And I ate my lunch, and then I went to the kitchen and I took a slice of milk tart that felt appropriate for me. She'd cut these huge slices. And I went and joined them, and there was no problem. And then after lunch, we were sitting in the office because we're all together at the moment creating a program. And this one counselor was sitting next to me trying to eat her lunch and saying, I didn't want that milk tart, but I felt obliged. So I wanted my lunch. And that's exactly how I would have been in the past. You know, it's like, please other people at my expense. And I try really hard to listen to my own body right now and my own needs. And that for me is so liberating.
Yeah. And it is so tricky, that piece with food, you know, when somebody else is bringing something in terms of sharing. And there's that fine line of, right, doing what's best for me, also making sure one isn't sort of pseudo restricting in any way that can have its own backfire, and also not offending the person, because there is this act of care, right, with food. And this is also, I think, why food works so well as a way of comforting ourselves until it doesn't, or until it goes past a point where it's actually not working in that way at all, because that is also built in food and how we, you know, how we are around food and how we, you know, come together around food and stuff like that. So it's just, there's so much into it. And I think that's another reason when, you know, people feel like they're compulsive overeaters or they feel addicted to food. It's like, it's very different to any other substance or even behavior type addictions, because abstinence isn't the solution here. It's not possible to be abstinent from food. You have to eat it. Sure, you can take out maybe certain types of food, but even sometimes that in itself can put us in this binge restrict cycle, even though you kind of go, I don't understand, but I'm eating these foods that I don't even like, or that doesn't even feel good in my body, but like underneath that is this kind of, either who are you to tell me I can't have it, so I'll rebel against that, or it's just inbuilt there somewhere. It's like, best eating now because I'm not going to have it again, even when we don't want it. It's weird, but it's kind of like it's kind of like that.
No, absolutely. So when I say it's taken me years, I stopped doing the obvious things within about a year. Like I stopped purging, I stopped taking laxatives, I started exercising and taking some care. But I was always very careful for many years about how I ate. And I'd have a few binges, and I can't say I didn't purge once in 30 years. I did, but few and far between. But then things like I start noticing, like at family functions, when there were lots of people and there were nuts or something on the table, I would just be sitting there unconsciously eating the nuts. And then it was like, what is actually going on here? Like, maybe family gatherings are not quite as, safe and lovely as I want to think they are, for me anyway, and learning to navigate that. And that's just one example. So over the years, I'm continually learning about myself, and this still triggers me, or, whatever it is. Yeah. And it's really, I feel like I have so much more freedom in maybe the past 10 years, than it's been a journey. It's been a journey. And yeah.
Yeah, and like it just shows how it takes time, and that there is kind of like, well, there's the sort of setup and the development of the disordered eating, maybe it turns. Then there's like the kind of denial that there's not an issue. I don't have an issue. This is what I do. It's fine. And then until it's not, or, circumstances sort of mitigate, or it just becomes really unbearable. And maybe there's like opportunities to kind of search for help or look for help, or maybe go, I need to do something. And then there's, I think, like what you're talking about there, is that there's initial stages where you may get on top of it, and the most prominent behaviors, might subside. But then after that, I feel, and even when I look at my own story, is there's the many layers and nuance of how we relate to food, to our body image, the cultural stuff, what we learn about diet culture. But I was thinking about earlier to do like food morality, and even as somebody's trained, some of that stuff is embedded in the training, and you kind of have to think about, right, what's helpful and what's not. And if we take that off, now there's space to really be explorative about what I'm eating, how I'm eating, how does this feel for me? Or if I'm eating, a couple of fingers of, twirls or whatever with my cup of tea, and it happens to be 3, but that's today, and that's the kind of like what makes up part of my lunch. Right, so what? Like, I just move on to something else, and it just feels like being able to just kind of just let food be food, as like, those quote unquote unicorns, normal people that never had any issues with food, that seem to be naturally be able to do those things.
Yeah.
They can take seconds if that's what they need. They can leave food on the plate if that's what they need. If they eat some sweets or chocolate or a slice of cake, they just move on with their day. They don't start thinking about, okay, now I'm going to have to compensate for this, or now I'm going to have to get rid of that, or now I've broken the rules, so what else can I be eating today now when I just had this thing, so I'll get all, like, there's none of that. It's like, it happened, or you eat something, God, my stomach's a bit sore, all right, so maybe that didn't work for me, so next time I might make a different choice. But it's like none of this continuous analyzing that is so exhausting,
Exhausting, absolutely. And I do feel that I've got to a stage in my life, and where I can eat intuitively, and I do. And people say silly things to me sometimes. I don't, people I don't even know will come up to me. I mean, they won't come up to me, strangers, but if I'm meeting someone through someone, they'll go, oh my God, do you eat? Because I am slender. And, or, oh, you're so lucky, you can eat whatever you want. And I say to them, I am, because today I can eat whatever I want. And sometimes what I want is a chocolate, and sometimes what I want is a piece of cake, but I don't want it the way I used to want it. All I wanted, I used to dream of rooms full of, as a child, of chocolates, just rooms full, just where's the chocolate? I once asked my dad, what would happen if I just ate chocolate? And he said to me, well, you'd get sick, which was true, but I didn't really understand it. And today, it's one of my least favorite things to eat. It's not that I won't eat a piece of chocolate. I don't like chocolate cake. Give me vanilla cake and I'll eat a whole piece, or carrot cake. But I've lost that very, very sweet tooth. I can only eat it to a certain amount. And I think that's fine,
Yeah.
and I think it's good, actually. So, but intuitive eating for me took a long time, to actually really understand and feel what my body needs.
Yeah.
And I eat so regularly now. Like because I taught myself how to eat breakfast and then have a morning snack and lunch, I get really hangry if I'm too far off that. If something happens and I miss my lunch, then I've got to sort that out as quickly as possible. So yeah, I think people need to be educated, and I'm always around people, even walking on the mountain with my dog. People are 10 meters away from me. I can hear them. They're walking up towards me. They're talking about this diet and how they need to change this, and this one's on Ozempic, and I'll go for lunch with my family, and my cousin's on a 5-day juice diet, and her daughter's on Ozempic, and she's 22 years old, and it's horrifying, and I don't really want to be talking to them about it or educating them because it's my job.
Yeah.
And in my free time, I don't want to be just advocating all the time. But sometimes I feel I need to, and other times I don't go with them because it's exhausting. It's
It is.
exhausting. But when people just they do not grasp the fact that if you're on a diet for the 25th time or the 100th time in your life, which most of them are, how can you possibly believe that diets work? And they don't get it. They
I
just
know. It's such a strange thing in terms of we can try all the things and it still feels like a failure, an internal, like a failure with oneself. And but I think as well, if you start looking at it though, like even if you look at some of the research there, there is a little subtle message as well that when people are, starting to regain the weight, well, it's because they can't stick to the diet. But whether they can't or they can, I was just coming across an article there because, we don't talk, I did a podcast interview with psychotherapist who was on some research in orthorexia, and that's a previous podcast episode that I'll link to. But we also ended up talking about atypical anorexia, which is anorexia for people in larger bodies. And that's a whole thing on itself. But then I came across an article recently, which I've also linked to, where they were really talking about, so why is this that some people, or actually quite a lot of people, can eat very little and either they don't lose weight or they still actually gain weight. And they explain it very well in the article, so I'm not going to make an attempt here, but basically there's two laws of thermodynamic, and we're only always looking at the first one, energy in, energy out, and try to balance that equation. But there's another system that works in an open system where it's not as simple as that, where the body is then where the system is trying to like manage the energy basically, and the body, how they describe it, is one of these open energy systems. So that's why it's not conducive to our survival to be in a state of famine. So preserving energy becomes incredibly important for our survival if we're not getting enough. And there's loads of different mechanisms in ways the body can do this, and some of that may lead to weight gain. So it's not even, and like you said, and usually the more times people have dieted over their life, the harder it becomes because the metabolism has changed and other impacts of that. So like, and genetics plays a role, environment plays a role, and body diversity is real. So
Yeah.
there's all of these things as well. So uprooting our own internal anti-fat bias, which, unlike you, I feel like I'm really solid in my own recovery for nearly 20 years, but yeah, you sort of notice kind of little thoughts and even old behaviors that are still there that are just remnants. They don't have a big impact, and they don't really like create a domino effect as they would have in the past. But I was like, oh, I'm still doing that. But it's just an old behavior, or it's still, I think, and the more people I have conversations with, whether they're clients or peers or colleagues, the fact also that when you're pursuing recovery, you're recovering into a culture that is highly disordered, and that are conversations everywhere all the time about diets and dieting and weight, which makes it 100 times harder, I think.
It's and there is, we live in such a culture of that, it's really hard to escape it. There are very few people I know who don't want to talk about this all the time, or so much of the time, and kind of feel I'm done with that, so I try not to, as much as I can. And on the other hand, I feel like I have a duty to say what is real, and tell. So I've told a few people a few times, and they don't want to listen. So that's it. I'm done. It's not my problem anymore. I can't control the outcome of what people do, and it's also self-preservation. I need to look after myself at the end of the day. When I'm at work, then it's all hands on,
Yeah. But I think that comes back to what you're saying at the beginning, that sense of, with lived experience, also knowing that when somebody's pursuing recovery, you have this other additional layer. So what you're trying to do in order to recover from the eating disorder is something that is incredibly radical within society's parameters, because it still keeps harping on about all the stuff that you were probably doing that weren't helpful and that led to even a diagnosable illness. And now you have to try to undo all of that and do the opposite of these things, while still listening to all the other people whose disordered eating hasn't become an eating disorder. Doesn't make it right, but it's kind of there. So it's, and somebody I spoke to recently were talking about this, and in terms of, it's very lonely and isolating when you're in your eating disorder, but then you recover, or you're pursuing recovery, and you're trying to do all the opposite of what the eating disorder has been telling you. And then you have society telling you all this stuff, or people around you, talking about all these things that you're now trying not to do because you don't want to be doing those anymore. And that becomes lonely then, like you said, because then you have to try to find the pockets of the people who really have other interests that you can talk about.
But it's not only people who are talking about food and wanting to lose weight and that kind of thing that I notice more and more. Like when I set boundaries with people that have got nothing to do with food, like I exhausted, I just don't want to have a conversation now. I get flack. I have someone who says to me, well, okay, well, I didn't want to talk anyway, but they'd started a conversation with me. It's like there's this defensiveness around people setting boundaries, and I get it, but I'm doing it because, and so I gravitate more and more towards the people who feed my needs now. And that can also be quite a journey, to find. And I do feel as if I have a core of friends who I feel safe to just be myself with. And that's really important, that you can say, I think that's a load of nonsense, or no, I don't want to go, or no, I don't, whatever, just say no, without feeling guilty and having to, shy away. So
Yeah, knowing
yes,
that the other person can take that,
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
respectful,
And
reciprocal relationship.
yeah,
Um,
and I do think that part of it is the work I've done, but I also have to give some credit to the fact that I think as we age, we generally care less, what people think. It's like getting to that stage of life where it's that you need to look after yourself, you need to look after your health, otherwise you're going to be a doddering old lady who can't do anything, can't lift up my grandchild, and life is short. You really do know that, and there isn't time for all the bull.
yeah.
I think that has come for me with age, and the work I've done. I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah. I feel like you kind of have to do the work alongside the aging in order
Yeah,
to deepen some of that wisdom. But I also do think there is a difference between when we're in our early 20s and when we're in our maybe mid 30s or late 30s or early 40s, like that you can't, like, you just have to live through it because it's also part of how we develop as humans and the life experience that we need to have in order to learn from it, and that would shape us. So there's no
yeah.
shortchanging that, I don't think. And you just have to live the years to get some of that perspective that you can't see
There's
when you're 22.
there's something I've just remembered, and I'm not sure if it was my early 20s or my late 20s, but I was surrounded by a group of friends, whatever you'd like to call them, but we would spend a lot of time socializing and going out and eating out, and it was quite trendy to go to the toilet afterwards and expel your food. Like that, I wouldn't talk about it, and I once got caught actually by someone who came into the toilets, and when I came out said to me, "Oh, were you like tickling your throat?" And I was shocked that anyone would even think such a thing, but I mean, it was absolutely true, and I denied it. But they would speak quite openly about this, and as if it was no big deal, and maybe they did not have bulimia. I don't know. I don't know, but
Questionable. I mean,
yeah,
I think any um intentional purging that happens more than once or
yeah,
once
yeah,
very rarely would have to be considered problematic. If
yeah,
if not only just for the potential risk of health damage that it can cause,
yeah.
whether it's your throat and your teeth and your esophagus and digestive system even. So
In fact, I know a woman who at the time, no, I hear you, and I've always said, like anyone who intentionally even once, there's something wrong. Why would you do such a thing? But there was a woman who proudly owned it at the time. She'd go, "Oh, I just go out for dinner and then I put my finger down my throat." And I'm sure she did have an eating disorder, completely in denial,
yeah.
but there was a stage when it was quite trendy to talk about it, and say, well, this is what I do. I don't
And
think a
it's
lot.
not, and that's kind of like minimizing, or it's like, well, it's not a problem. This is
Absolutely.
just like, well,
Yeah.
what's the problem with that? And I think that's the kind of where it can get dangerous in these things, like, and whether it's with purging or it's over exercising or using laxatives, because there's this kind of, and like when you grew up or even when I grew up, whereas you were talking about maybe not even having a television, but like we didn't grow up with social media, where so these trends were kind of maybe pockets around people, you know your friends or close associates or work colleagues, whereas now these trends can spread like wildfire because it's accessible on your phone and you can reach thousands and thousands of people. And I think the challenge is, and when I said earlier, it's like, you recover into society that is disordered. There's so much like these things that become normalized, that it's like, oh yeah, well, that's not a problem, or you like, until, and then it feels almost like the shame then is like, well, when you can't keep it up because you're not supposed to be able to keep it up, whether that's the exercise or the purging or the restricting or whatever, it's like, or the dieting, it's like, then it becomes a me problem.
Yeah.
But it's not a me problem. You're not supposed to keep it up. The problem is that we are in a society that thinks these things are fine. They're not fine. They're problematic and potentially
Absolutely.
really dangerous and very harmful.
And I spoke about the bulimia affecting my physical health, my weakness, but I completely forgot to tell you, and it's just come to me now, that I had gut issues for years and years and years. And I've eventually kind of got things to mostly normal, but, bloating and pain, and for years IBS, and it's all from my eating disorder, and I knew this, and I've known it for years, and yeah, that was a big part of my health issues, and sometimes it will never come right.
Yeah.
I know people who never managed to lead a normal, healthy gut life again, which is,
and digestive issues can be, it's like one of those things, like when things are working well, you don't really think about it, it's kind of like part of your life or whatever, but when it's not working well, it can be incredibly debilitating and take a huge chunk out of somebody's like ability to just live their everyday life. So I think that's the thing. I suppose what I'm really curious about, Pam, is also what over the course, and of course there's like many things probably, but what are the things that have been really helpful in your recovery to both be able to stop the behaviors, but also like moving to this place of like real genuine self-care and self-love towards yourself?
Sure. It's quite a question. I mean, I was in therapy for many years, and I still sometimes, if I feel the need now, I see the same therapist that I never saw for about 8 years. I stopped, and then 8 years later I found her, and I'm going, oh, thank goodness I found you, because she'd moved. So I did a lot of work on my core beliefs, on stuff that had shaped my life, and also a lot of self-care and self-compassion, meditation, which I found so hard to do. Like to sit with myself and be with myself was impossible for a good many years. But eventually I got to a place where I know I need rest. I know I need to walk. I know I need some, input from positivity. And I don't really know how to tell you how I got here, but I've done a lot of work through the year. And I still do. I'm going through a very stressful period in my life right now. I'm moving, and I think I have an apartment, but I'm not sure. I have to move. I've sold my house, and I have 2 dogs, and nobody wants dogs. So I've started a new job. I'm running after work from apartment to apartment, trying to find somewhere that's suitable. And so far it hasn't happened, and it's exhausting. And, and I do stress quite easily, but I feel in so many ways with the stress, I feel good about me. I know I'm okay. I haven't taken it out in any negative behaviors, and that says to me, okay, you're doing okay, I remember, it's like, I think I read a lot. The thing that I recently took up, which I can't remember his name right now, at the 5 a.m. Club. I don't know if you've heard of it. Anyway, he says you should get up an hour before people normally get up. So, I mean, it's winter now. I used to get up at 5 o'clock in summer and go for a walk with my dogs on the mountain, and that was delicious. But it's winter, it's cold, it only gets dark at it only gets light at 7:30, and that's when I'm leaving for work. So I cannot walk with them. It's too dangerous. So I got myself into a completely different routine now, and it's only been a month. So I still get up at 5 o'clock, and I do a half an hour of stretches and a bit of arms and a bit of abs, just to get my body moving. And then I listen to a meditation or Jay Shetty's always got something positive to say about life, and then go downstairs, make myself a cup of coffee and a rusk, bring it upstairs, get back into bed with my computer. I look through my emails. It's my time. I feel as if that is the time of day when nothing can get to me because there's so much going on. And, I just adopted that through trying something different. I was getting up, and then I saw this book, The 5 a.m. Club, and I thought, well, I get up at that time, so let me read it. And he brought all, and so I have to adapt to what's going on. My dogs still need to go out, but they can't go out then. So my morning routine with the exercise is it's just getting me going. And then I'll go for half an hour decent walk with my dogs on the mountain, or 3/4 of an hour. And some days I don't manage it because I just don't have the time, and that's okay too, so I'm much less harsh on myself. But how I got here, it's hard to put in words.
Sounds like, I think what's still gotten to me, it's like, also you said it was really difficult to be with yourself for a long time, but it's only about, I suppose, like continuously trying, or otherwise if we just abandon it, so it's not possible for me, well, then probably nothing's going to change. Like, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So it's that kind of continuously doing the work, even if it feels like nothing is changing.
Yeah.
Things, and I feel like that too, is like that sort of, sometimes the change is so gradual, like it's like it takes a long time before you realize, I'm not doing that anymore. Or I've also noticed that my own inner critic is like, it's nowhere near as harsh as it would have been maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It's like, oh, right. I mean, it's not like I don't, you don't feel shame, or that I don't get stuck in spirals, but it's not relentless. Like, it's not a relentless self-criticism all the time. Like, I can listen back to these podcasts for my editing, for example, without almost like throwing up, because it's just so horrid.
Every now and again, I feel like I read something or I hear something, and it's the right time for me to hear it. So Atomic Habits, James Cleary, is another person who made such an impact on me, because it was like, oh, okay, there isn't a goal. Don't do it for the outcome. Do it for the sake of doing it. And, just little bits at a time will add up. And so I don't exercise to get super arms. I exercise because I want to be able to carry my grandchild. Like, I want to be strong enough to, carry on having a decent life. And it's just changing my perspective. Whereas before, everything was about looking good, feeling good, looking good was much more important than feeling good. In fact, looking good was everything to me, and I understand where I came from with that, because I had such a hard time not looking good. And I find that so sad. I really do.
Yeah.
For everybody today who doesn't look like the model and doesn't have the perfect figure, and it's really hard, and because people don't like it,
No.
and it's just very sad. But to have got beyond that and do things because they feed me. I do things that actually really feed my soul now and feed my energy, and not for any other sake. Mostly. Can't say I never, ever, ever have a vain moment, because I do.
Nice to hear you're also human. But
Exactly.
I like
Yeah.
the expression you used there, like saying, "Oh, I'm doing things that feeds me," and that brings me to the question I always ask all people. But before I ask you that, if somebody's listening to our conversation today and they might recognize some of the behaviors you described and kind of thinking, if you're listening to this, maybe you're interested in eating disorder recovery. But often, there tends to be a huge amount of ambivalence, and that ambivalence can go on for months and years before we're really ready, or before it becomes so unmanageable, so it's just, kind of out of options. But if somebody is there kind of either in the early stages of pursuing a recovery or kind of in the stage of contemplating it, what would you like to say to them?
Ask for help. Speak up, and maybe it's not to someone who is close to you. You got to find someone who you trust and just feel safe with. Yeah, I'm not too sure what else I would say. What would you say?
Yeah, I think asking for help is a good one, and I agree with you. It's like, find a practitioner that you feel safe or good working with, and it's okay to try a few. And it's also difficult sometimes if you're stuck with a public system, or you have to wait because there isn't a means to go private.
Yeah,
If there's financial means there, you might have more options to look in a wider kind of way. But I think the other thing that I would love to say to people is, like, it's worth it. It's really hard. It can be very long and slow, and sometimes I
I'm
think it feels
sorry.
like
I don't know why that's going off. Yeah.
um it can take a long time, and it can be really gradual, and sometimes it can feel like you're going backwards, but you might be still going forwards. But I do think it's always worth it. And if you're trying one thing and that brings you a certain distance, and then it's not working as in terms of treatment or support, and you need something else, that's fine too, because that's what I found, even for a self growth or self discovery work, you have different teachers and mentors throughout your life, different seasons, and different people's and different teachings resonate. And I think that's fine. I think that's, for me, when I work with people, I don't know if you agree with me with this, it's like, the idea is not to have somebody there for forever. The idea is to get somebody that they're solid enough that they know themselves, that even if you have a setback or life gets difficult, you either know that you can reach out for help, or and you also have enough stability that you know how to bring yourself back to
Yeah.
that. But because it's not linear, and it's not like, I think, if you ever had disordered eating or an eating disorder, that it ever completely goes away. It can rear up again at other life stages. So I think that, I suppose what I mean with that is that there is certain vulnerability there always for somebody who's had that experience, even if they're really well and in active recovery for a very long time. I think the vulnerability is always there, because if it
Absolutely.
wasn't there, you probably wouldn't have developing develop that in the first place.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. One of the problems of getting help here, I don't know about in Ireland, but in South Africa, is that I don't think people know where to find the help. There is very little support. And we had our first eating disorder conference in the country a few weeks ago. I mean, it's crazy. And there were all these people there who are too scared. All these psychologists and dietitians and coaches, doctors, psychiatrists who are too scared to work with eating disorders because they find it too complicated and they don't know enough. They haven't been trained in this way. So people come into treatment because they're so far gone, or by word of mouth. So because I worked in the industry for so long, the addiction industry, and then I worked I opened a second stage of treatment for eating disorders many years back, but I only stayed there for about 5 years because I just couldn't juggle both. It was too much for me. But I became known as one of the therapists who worked with eating disorders. So I'm the one. And it's like there's so many people, and where are the therapists? Where are they? And not in private, not in private. So it's a problem here. And I don't think people know who to ask for help, unless they land up in an inpatient facility.
Yeah, and at that point, like in here, in order to get help in patients, like there's a waiting list and there's very limited spaces, and it can take a long time before, even when it's recognized that that's what's needed. But there's so many other, it's better in an ideal world if people can get help much sooner, or it's kind of where people are floating around in this kind of disordered space where, either not thinking that is this a problem, or it kind of goes, yeah, actually, maybe I do need to do something about this. Or people are stuck in the kind of like, I haven't found the right diet yet. If I just find another diet, or I need to go back to a slimming club or something. And actually, that's not necessarily what they need, because they might have tried that 15 million times already. And if that worked, it would have worked by now. And I think knowing that there are other paths to take to have a better relationship with food and our bodies, and that dieting isn't really the path that's going to get us there. That's usually a disruptor in the first place. So So Pam, it's just been really lovely to hear your story, and also kind of having your personal experience with a bit of the professional experience, because you worked a very long time in this space as well. And I feel like, I mean, maybe it's because I'm in this space myself now as a professional, that a more conversation, there seems to be more people in private practice. I don't know, maybe I'm still thinking more so in the US than, like you're talking about, South Africa or even in Ireland, that people are getting trained, or they're putting themselves, are working in this space and not so scared of it. Like, but it's still kind of a new, even in 30 years, it's still kind of a new field and not recognized. And the understanding is also very limiting. Like, there's still a perception, I think, when people, you say, or you work with people with eating disorders, it's like, oh, you must see a lot of young people. And I see primarily adults, and, often people, women, mostly in their 40s, 50s. Yeah. It's not like the 15-year-olds. Unfortunately, they're there too, but there's a whole gamut there. And it's like, knowing where do you go for help? What is it going to be like? And finding somebody who is trained as well, and ideally who's not somebody who's going to put anybody who is in a larger body on a strict diet, because that's not going to help.
And I think people also get really frightened. Like I spoke to someone, I was marketing myself at the time, and she contacted me and she cried on the phone. She felt like understood and heard for the first time ever. And she made an appointment to come and see me, and it went so well. And I explained so much to her, and it was like, okay, this is the work we're going to do, and blah, blah, blah. And then she phoned me a few days later to say, I learned so much from you, and I feel like I'm on track now. And I wish her the best. I really hope she is. But I also think she got really scared of the work ahead, and I think that is so often the case because it's not about food.
No.
I have another client who is bulimic, and I love her. She's the most delightful young lady, and she's going through so much at the moment, and it's louder than ever. It's louder. Her bulimia is louder than it was when I met her and when I first started working with her. And I'm saying, you know what, you're going through a lot. Let's just try and deal with what you're going through and stop beating yourself up so much for it, because that's the truth. What can you do except learn to manage your feelings better? And that takes time.
That just
That's
takes
not a
time.
quick fix, and just for her to have that space where I'm not shaming her and I'm saying it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not saying go out and forth and just do this, but if you do, just stop punishing yourself and let's look at what's going on.
Yeah.
And there's a long road ahead. I can see it because, there's stuff, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I think what you talked about there as well is like that ambivalence. And sometimes you explain, well, here's maybe the reasons this might be happening, and here's, and then here's what we can do that's different. And then it's like, oh gosh, I don't know if I'm ready, or if it's too much, or I think a lot of the time as well, particularly when people maybe have gained weight or they're in a bigger body, it's like, well, let me just lose the weight first and then I'll come back and work on my relationship with food.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very common. And you know
Yeah.
what? That's okay. If that's where people are at, that's okay. Sometimes we have to go around enough times until we are ready, until we are kind of in that,
Yeah.
ready for either contemplating or inaction. And it's fine. It takes the time it takes. And sometimes people come for one session or 5, or sometimes you work with people for a few years, and it's all fine. And I think we're ready. Or sometimes it's not a good match, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
And that's why I like having conversations with people before I take somebody on, because then we'd have an opportunity to figure things out. But even doing that, you can still have the experience that you had. And I think the first session goes really well, and then or the second, and then people go, or I'm busy, or something kind of happened, or I don't have the finances now. Okay, that's okay. And I always say the door is always open.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes I just finished with somebody recently that I've been working for quite a while, and they're doing really well. And this is, so what do you want to do now? And she's like, I think I just want to, I want to carry on, what I'm doing, and knowing you have a sense as well when you're maybe coming to the end or things are going really well. And then I said, you know what? I said, the door is always open. If you want to come back in 6 months for a session, or a year or 2 years from now, whatever, it's fine. If you feel like you just, I just want to come and have a chat or explore a few things, that's always okay. And then it felt like that reassured them a little bit in terms of, okay, I can do this on my own, but it's not like, I can come back just even for a one-off kind of if I need to, and it's nice. But it is always, I feel like it's a bit bittersweet when you finish with people that you've been working with for a while, because for me, and I was thinking about this the other day, the relational aspect of working with people one-on-one is so important and so nourishing. So when you finish up with people because they're doing well, which is the whole point of the work, and it's kind of like, okay, that's great, and now I have to say goodbye, and that's our own work, but it's just it's lovely, and you work with people, and that's the relational aspect of that is so good. Bittersweet for sure.
Bittersweet, yeah.
So we've been talking about feeding, so as we come to a close, I always ask all my guests what joyful nourishment means to them. So what does that mean to you, Pam?
It's more than food. It's joyful nourishment is nourishing my body and respecting my body in all aspects. I love food. I've always loved food, but I always looked for the dopamine hit with food. Now I enjoy nourishment. Joyful nourishment is being with like-minded people, enjoying a delicious meal. It's walking on the mountain with my dog without anybody, just looking at this beautiful Table Mountain in front of me. It's connecting with my new granddaughter, my daughter, connection. I think joyful nourishment for me is so much about connection, and that is something that I never had for so many years. I always felt like I was different. I was on the outside. I didn't know how to, and it's a beautiful feeling when you can connect.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's my answer.
Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense, and thanks for being a guest on the Joyful Nourishment Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment Podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.